Good evening, this is Nicole Ringgold, and guess what I'm going to show you this time? I'm pretty darn excited. The maidenhair fern is so beautiful and delicate. Its name is very similar to the ginkgo, which is sometimes called the maidenhair tree. I'm going to be showing you how to make kinetic maidenhair fern earrings. But before I jump in, thank you again to Rio Grande for sponsoring my YouTube channel. You can see all of the details in the description of this tutorial below. So here I've got a maidenhair fern, and I'm going to show you how to make about 3 different parts, about that size, per earring, maybe this size. You can of course make them a lot smaller if you prefer. I'll be using scrap 24 gauge sterling silver sheet. That makes sure that it's nice and lightweight. You can either glue the maidenhair fern onto your sheet and then saw it out, or you can use a Sharpie to sketch out the leaves. And since it's 24 gauge sterling silver sheet, you'll use a 4 or 5/0 saw blade to saw all of it out. If you're not familiar with the saw blade and drill size chart, it's available via Rio Grande or Green Lion saw frame. I also have it shown in some of my previous tutorials. Also in my previous tutorials, I give you tips on how to saw smoothly, like as if you're sawing through butter. But once you're done, this is what you should have. This is just one earring, by the way. So first I'm going to anneal the silver, which for me is a foolproof way of cleaning it and ensuring that it's malleable or porous so that I can solder onto it. I have a Little Smith oxygen propane torch, and as you can see, I have a soft annealing flame. For more information about the Little Smith torch, I have a full-length tutorial in which I go over the torch and all of the colors of the silver. So now you're going to need 20 gauge sterling silver round wire. I use half hard. I'm snipping it into about a 1/2 inch length. I'm going to flux the wire and all of the silver, and I use Mighty Flux, my T Flux, which is from Rio Grande. I'm going to sweat medium solder to the tip of each wire. To do so, I've got a bunch of pieces of medium solder on my platform. This is Silquar, S-I-L-Q-U-A-R, soldering platform. There's the solder. And I take a piece of wire in my tweezers, put it next to a piece of medium solder, sweat it onto the wire, and now I'm putting it on the piece of silver, and I'm going to heat the silver, the mass, to draw the solder from the wire to the mass. I'll do that a few more times so that you understand what I'm talking about. Okay, picking up the piece of solder, it's already fluxed. I sweat medium solder to it, placing it down on the sheet and heating the sheet to draw the solder from the wire down to the sheet. I'll zoom in so that you can see it even better. Using my tweezers, picking up the wire, sweating a piece of medium solder to the tip of the wire, placing the wire on my sheet, heating the mass. You can see I'm not even heating the wire, to draw the solder from the wire down to the mass or down to the sheet. One more time. Sweating medium solder, placing it on the mass, which is pre-fluxed. Now I'm going to heat the mass, not the wire, drawing the solder from the wire down to the mass. From here, I'm going to solder the components together, again using medium solder. I'm snipping the wire so that it's an angle, and when I place it up against another piece of wire, it's flush. Make sure that you flux. Again, I'm using my T Flux, Mighty Flux. And just FYI, my pick is titanium made by Lion Punch Forge. My tweezers are also titanium, which means I can place them in the pickle. So here I'm going to pick up some solder with my pick. Remember to heat the solder, not your pick, and your pick needs to be clean in order to pick up that solder. Keep in mind, okay, it looks like, so here my platform is not only hot, so the solder wants to stick to the platform, but it's dirty in that spot. Any case, sweating the solder to the wire and then drawing it over. Okay, that was fast. I'll show you that again. These are cutoff wheels. Sometimes they're called separating discs, and I'm using it to blend the wire into the sheet. I'm also using it to bevel the edges of the little leaves. Once I'm happy with that, I'll switch to cross-cut cylinder burrs. And if you want more information on this particular texture, you can refer back to my ginkgo leaf tutorial, which is just the last tutorial I offered. Make sure that you dig in not too hard, but definitely not too light, because your polishing might take out your texturing if it's too light. But you can use these to create the fan-like texture in the leaves. So then you'll take that and you'll solder it to the next series of leaves. It's a little like putting together a puzzle. And I like to make sure that I'm fine-tuning with the separating disc, or the cutoff wheel, sorry, and the cross-cut cylinder burr, because I like to do it about 2 leaves at a time so that I can make sure that I can access all of the edges without too many complicated and intricate pieces getting in my way. Don't forget to flux. And then all the way through, I'm just using medium solder. I've been asked previously to share how much propane I start with, and for this entire project, I'm not going above 2.5 inches of propane the entire project. And then I add my oxygen. From here for a little bit, it's a repeat of what I've already shown you. I use my flush cutters to ensure that the wires are flush, sitting one against one another. And then I'm using medium solder. Make sure that if you're feeling like the solder is not gonna flow, you have to focus on heating the mass in order for the solder to flow. I'll point out what I mean. Okay, so here I'm going to add another leaf. I'm ensuring that it's flush against the wire. Adding Mighty Flux. Given that it's 20 gauge wire, my propane is only about 1 inch to 2 inches to start with. Pick soldering, medium solder. I'm heating the mass. Do you see how I'm heating the entire thing? And as soon as it's ready, I can tell it's ready by the color of the silver. Then I can go to the exact spot and ensure that the solder flows. Then I'm going to go back to my flex shaft. I'm using the cutoff wheel or the separating disc to bevel the edges, to smooth the wire into the silver sheet to make it seamless. And then from there, I'll use the crosscut cylinder burr to carve in the pattern. I do want to take just a moment to remind you that I have a full-length tutorial on the Little Smith torch, specifically oxygen propane, in which I teach you how to set it up, how to turn it off, on, that's funny, I mean on, off, up, down. I talk about all of the colors of the silver. So if you have questions, please do refer back to that tutorial. Now for the kinetic components. I'm going to take this particular section. The wire I left a little bit longer, and I'm using my round nose pliers and creating a tiny lollipop top. I'm going to show you how to fuse this, but for more information, I have a full-length tutorial called the barbell chain. Start with, that looks like about a 1.5 inch amount of propane, add your oxygen. There's that beautiful blue flame. And so from here, I'm pointing out where the mass is. And then I'm going to use my pick at right around 11 o'clock to nudge it inward so that they're touching and they're fused. Again, refer to the barbell chain tutorial for much more specific details about that technique. Once you have that fused, take the initial components that you've soldered together, place them right up against the jump ring. And again, you're going to use medium solder to solder them together. Make sure the wires are flush, add flux, and then I'm going to use medium solder once again. Heat the solder, not the pick. Make sure your pick is clean. Heat the mass. And once the mass has turned slightly yellow hue, you can go directly to the spot that you want to solder and it should flow. My wire is sticking up a little bit, so I'm going to reheat it and nudge the wire downward so it's flush. That's layer 1. I'm going to set that aside and start on the upper layer, following the exact same process. Snipping the wires so that they're flush, soldering them together with medium solder, heating the mass until the solder is ready to flow at that small juncture, making another loop or lollipop top, and then fusing that. And that's where your kinetic component well, that's where the magic will happen. Solder all of those components together. Flux, use medium solder, heat the mass. Heat the solder, not your pick. Make sure that your pick is clean. To transfer the solder from your pick to the piece, you want to heat the piece, not your pick. If you heat your pick, then the solder will wonder, where do you want me to go? It'll say, the pick is nice and hot. I want to stay there. Just remember, solder follows heat. So heat your piece, not the pick. That's layer 2. Now, layer 3. Same thing. Repeat all of the steps I just showed you. I'm going to speed up this section just so that you don't get bored. And there you have the third layer. Now we can place all the components together. This is the fun part. Actually, it's all been fun, but this part is really fun. Make sure you know exactly where you want each of the layers to connect. From there, you'll take about 1/2 inch or less 20 gauge wire, the same as previously, and you're going to sweat medium solder again to the tip of each wire. Make sure that everything is fluxed. Transfer the wire. Now I'm heating the mass, as you can see. So I'm creating a pin. Heat the mass until the solder on the wire flows down to the sheet. There I have a pin. Let's do it again. Here's another 20 gauge wire. I'm going to sweat, it's previously fluxed. I'm going to sweat medium solder to the tip of the wire, put it exactly where I want the kinetic component to swivel. I'm placing it on that sheet. Oh, sorry, my solder dropped off. Just a second. Okay. Now I'm transferring it to the sheet, heating the sheet, the mass, until the solder from that wire is drawn down to the sheet. There, we have a second pin. Take the lollipop top, put it over the 20 gauge wire pin on both components so that all three are connected. I created a tutorial called the bicycle chain. The technique used here is very similar to that, so please refer back to it if you want more information. I'm snipping the 20 gauge wire so that it's only about 1/4 inch, sticking up. And then I'm going to turn on my torch, and it's going to be super hot. Turn it on, turning up the propane, oxygen. I'm going to point across, not down, because I don't want to heat my piece. I only want to heat the pin. I don't want to compromise the solder. Nothing is fluxed, so hopefully the solder won't flow. And again, pointing across, not down, and balling up those pins to hold them in place. You may have to rotate your piece because when you heat the ball, it will fall toward the heat. So if you want to balance out the balls, just rotate and heat from the other side. There you have kinetic maidenhair ferns. You can use round nose pliers to give the ferns a little bit more movement. If they seem to stick when you're trying to move them, you can also use the round nose pliers to create gaps. It's only 20 gauge wire, so just be sure to be a little bit careful when you're maneuvering them with pliers or your fingers. There we have it. Okay, now we have to add ear wires. You may have clients who prefer 18 gauge wire, but I have not really experienced that, so I usually use 20 or 21 gauge wire. Make a loop, fit it through that final lollipop top, and in the end I'm going to use easy solder for this particular joint. I'm gonna lay it down on my surface. I'm going to flux. I'm laying it down so that it's not sticking up. The seam needs to be flush. Taking easy solder. There's the flux. And then I'm going to heat, just like with the barbell chain, I'm heating the mass for the curve, not the most vulnerable point, the tip of the wire. I'm going to heat that to draw the solder down into the seam. Flux, taking that solder on my pick. Not sure you can see it, I'm heating below. Oh, already done. It happens really quickly if you focus your torch on the mass. Now, I use liver of sulfur, and I like to heat my piece rather than the liver of sulfur because the liver of sulfur then lasts a week. If you heat the liver of sulfur, it only lasts a day. So I'm heating the piece and applying the liver of sulfur. To do this, don't heat your piece to soldering flow point. It's just an annealing flame, so it's a very gentle torch, very gentle heat. And I'm applying it with a brush. From here I use a coarse fiber wheel and then sunburst radial discs to take off some of that liver of sulfur and to polish my piece. As always, reach out if you have questions. Please comment, ask questions below. I really do try to answer every single question and reply to every comment. I appreciate your feedback. I'm excited for what's next, so I hope you stay tuned. Aren't they beautiful? Please reach out again if you have questions. I would love to help.